This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Linode, high-performance cloud hosting for everyone. Visit linode.com/MacVoices and take $20 off your first server package. MacVoices is supported by LinkedIn Jobs. Find the right person for your business today with LinkedIn Jobs. Pay what you want and get $50 off your first job post at linkedin.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, it seems like I introduced so many guests by saying, boy, it's a long time since we talked too. But that's sort of the way it is because we talk to so many people, and even if you just make the rounds once, it ends up being a long time in between. But we are definitely way overdue talk to Jeff Carlson about, well, one of his many projects. Jeff, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here.
It's great to be back. It seems like it. Well, it always seems like it's been too long, and I think we only spoke maybe a couple months ago. But then again, a couple months seems like forever. So that's just the way time is right now.
It does, and we're all busy. And what seems like well, I just talked to Jeff, and then you realize it's 2 or 3 months ago. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I know you have a number of projects in the works, and hopefully you'll be back a little sooner, I should say, than a couple months. But this time around, we want to talk about your newest book, which is The Photographer's Guide to Luminar 4. And I'm anxious to hear about this book because I look at Luminar, I play with Luminar, and I know it can do some amazing things. I've done some, what I think, at least for me, are amazing things, and I know it can do so much more. So I need help.
That's what I'm here for. That's what the book is here for. So this is a book that it's had kind of a long gestation. When Rocky Nook approached me, the publisher is Rocky Nook, which is a great bunch of people. When they approached me and basically asked, we want to do something that's not Lightroom, that's not Photoshop, because those are well covered in the market. What sort of other applications seem to be contenders, photo editing applications, because I think partially because Adobe switched to a subscription model several years ago now, we're still seeing some of the effects of that, where I think after they did that, and there were just, a fair number of people who were like, no, I don't want to pay a subscription for Lightroom or for Photoshop. And they started looking elsewhere. And as an after effect of that, a lot of photo editing apps and developers basically sprung up or, sort of boosted the things that they were working on. And so now there's like this great, non-Adobe marketplace of different apps that will, do all your photo editing at, more affordable price points or not, with a subscription. And so, we looked at the market, and Luminar was really sort of, guns blazing. They had started out as Mac Fun, making plugins and things like that. And at some point they said, okay, we have an opportunity to make something that can really compete with Lightroom, can compete with Photoshop, and not necessarily try to be Photoshop, which is kind of a nice distinction. And so my editors and I, we were like, well, this looks like a really good topic for a book. And since then, Luminar has really, established itself as, I would say one of the big, Lightroom contenders. And it's actually like in the most recent version 4 that came out, I want to say, I think it was either October or November of last year, takes quite a different approach to photo editing that's really geared toward, hey, anybody can do this, but there's a whole lot of power here too. So I've already forgotten the question. I'm just sort of rambling on about it. Well, friends, this is how that's how these interviews go.
Well, yeah, but you know what? You kind of took me exactly where I wanted to go to the next question, because
good.
You're right. There are so many great photo editing apps out there but they more or less kind of look like Photoshop or look like the Photoshop interface that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Luminar just to me seems to be a complete departure from that. And I mean that only in the most positive way, because I find it to be a little more approachable from an experimentation standpoint. It makes me want to spend time with it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the hallmarks. I mean, I might as well sort of like launch into why I like Luminar, because there are applications out there that basically do a lot of the things that Photoshop does, and they feel like Photoshop because they are appealing to people who used Photoshop, and you sort of have like the same visual layout and the same kind of structure and the same the same approach, because they know that a lot of their customers have that muscle memory. But there are a whole bunch of people who have never used Photoshop, don't want to use Photoshop, and they still want to take their photos and make them look really good. And so what I like about Luminar's approach, and it's kind of interesting because version 3 last year, which is what I started writing the book about, was sort of this hybrid of, having tools, they called them filters, that would do specific things. You want to adjust your hue and your color. Well, you would use this filter. You want to adjust contrast. You would use this filter, and you could sort of mix and match. And it was like really powerful. But there was also a lot of things that were redundant that did the same tasks. And so with version 4, they stripped a whole lot of that away. And so now it's much more simpler, and you have tools that are, as you said, approachable, but there are also tools in there that don't assume that you have any Photoshop knowledge, that don't require you to even really know what a histogram is, and yet you can still make really good images. And part of that too is the structure of it. So you have the Luminar app, but it also works as a plugin for other things. So, I'm sure there are a lot of people who they keep all their photos in Apple's Photos app. And, that's how they do all the organization. And while Photos has a lot of really good editing tools, it's not quite as robust as what Luminar is. Well, you can just send any image to Luminar, round trip it, do your edits there, come back, and you still have a non-destructive result that looks and takes advantage of some of Luminar's tools.
Before I forget this, I want to make sure, though, that people understand when you are taking things outside of Photos and working, say, in Luminar, you don't have the ability to step back quite as far as you do if you just work within Photos. Am I correct on that?
That's correct. Yeah. So the way it works is, and this works with almost everything that acts as a Photos extension, where you're sending out a version of the image to Luminar, you're making your edits, and then Luminar returns a result. Returns a result to Photos, and Photos, that's your edited version. Now, if you decide that that's not really what I wanted, you can just revert back to the original. But you can't go in and say, oh, you know what, I need to change the light slider so that or the light tools or the brightness or the contrast. I can't just tweak those a little bit. You have to kind of start over. There are ways to get around that, and Luminar doesn't quite do that yet, I don't think. Of course, now that you brought it up, I'm like, wait, are they one of them that do? But
and each version, they add new features. So
exactly.
But it's something just to be aware of, that you might you may be able to step back in Photos the way you can do in Photos, but when you use the external editors, especially we think Luminar included, you can't go quite back incrementally as easily.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. So,
there are features I want to ask you about, but if you will, talk about some of, I guess, either your favorite features or the features you feel like have seen the biggest improvements and changes.
Yeah, definitely.
Versions.
Well, so the Luminar will do all the basics. It'll handle your exposure and your highlights and your color adjustments, like that's sort of what do they call it, table stakes. Like it'll do all that, and it has a lot of professional controls for digging into, like for example, it has a good details control. So when you're doing sharpening in your image, a lot of apps, like you have like just a sharpening slider, or maybe a sharpening slider and a detail slider, and there's like kind of a mix there. Luminar has like 3 different levels. You can do basically like fine sharpening, medium sharpening, broad sharpening, and it just gives you a whole lot of control. But what I think is interesting about Luminar, and a thing that they're really pushing, is they've spent a lot of time and a lot of energy putting a lot of AI focused controls in. And I know that's like almost sounds sort of like a buzzword thing. It's like, oh, well, now we have AI, so everything is better. But what's a good way to put this? Like the AI has been implemented strategically and well. So it's not just like, oh, we have AI. It's what's a good way to say it? Like, okay, for example, there is a control called AI exposure. And of course, now I have to open it up here. Sorry. There's a control called AI enhance. And it is the, drag this slider and make everything better control. A lot of apps have always had like an auto button. And, it uses algorithms to kind of figure out what would be a good balance of light and tone and color. But the AI enhance, like, it really does a great job, because it's not only looking at what the tones and the color in your image are, but it's also has like a knowledge of shots like this. So it knows that you're looking at a landscape shot, or it knows that you're looking at a portrait shot, and can make adjustments based on that. And it almost sounds like cheating. You're like, okay, well, why would I buy this whole program that has all these controls if really moving this one slider will do 80% of the work? And that's kind of the point, because you're letting the software do a lot of the work. Now, you may not, think that that's the best implementation, but that's sort of like the easiest example. But they also have AI specific controls for like adjusting skies. So let's imagine you have a landscape image, and quite often, the sky might be a little bit brighter because, of course, that's where the sun is, or even like at a sunset, that might be a little brighter, and your foreground will be darker. So, using the AI enhance, you can sort of balance that out quite a bit. But sometimes your sky gets a little too bright and loses definition. Well, there's a AI sky enhancer, and it's just a slider, but it knows where the sky is. It can figure out which part of the image is the sky and just make that better. So usually it'll add some contrast to the sky, maybe darken it if it's too light. That's something that in other programs you would have to draw a gradient mask, or maybe do separate selections and things that take a lot more time. So that's another good example. It has really good portrait tools, and this was actually a little bit of a surprise to me, because portrait editing, like, if you really know how to do portrait editing, it's very complicated and technical, and the people who are like professional retouchers are amazing. And because it's not like something you can just say, oh, well, I'm just going to, blur this part of the skin. And I'm sure we've all seen, pictures of really, really bad Photoshop jobs. There was one, some photographer who did not know Photoshop, was trying to smooth people's faces, and literally it looked like that that picture of Jesus that the well-meaning old nun tried to retouch, like, just like flat and blurry, like scary. And so, oftentimes trying to do this manually is very hard. There are processes where you go into Photoshop and you create multiple layers and you blend them, and and quite honestly, for most people, you're just like, well, okay, so I don't need to go to all that trouble. So what the portrait tools in Luminar do, they take advantage of the AI to say, okay, first of all, like you're not going to make any masks, because Luminar can look at your picture and say, okay, there are 3 different people there, and I know where the faces are, and I know, where people's eyes are and their noses and their lips, because the AI can figure that out. Once it knows that, it can do all sorts of things. So, for example, there is a AI skin enhancer. And basically, like, all that does is just smooth your skin, gets rid of blemishes, and just sort of makes skin look better. Even to the point where, like, if you have, like a bright spot or a shine, from the sun or from an external light, it can deal with that. And when I say that, I should also point out that it's not just, making somebody look like baby smooth, because, like, we don't want that. It actually does a really good job of smoothing the skin, but keeping the texture, which doesn't sound like those two things sound opposite, but when done right, it just looks more flattering. It's not going to take, 10 years off of your face or your wrinkles and all of that. But what it's going to do is just basically make someone look a little more flattering. And that also extends to, has tools like, there's a great one that just deals with eyes, right? Because oftentimes when you're looking at a portrait, you're looking at somebody, you're looking at their eyes, and it will, sort of add a little bit of contrast, a little bit of brightness to it. It's not going to make you look like, a cat in the middle of the night looking at a flashlight, like none of these controls really go overboard, which I love about them. There's one for removing dark circles under the eyes. And, it's not something that makes people look plastic. It just makes them look better. And part of the appeal of doing something like this, and like, there's a little bit in the back of my brain that's like, no, like, we don't want to do all these sort of like body modification edits and things like that. The whole history of the fashion industry and airbrushing and all that, like that's not the road that they go down. It's totally somebody's lips seem like the color's sort of too close to the rest of their face. Well, you drag one little slider and it's like, well, make their lips just a little bit more red, or, give their eyes a little more definition. And it does that because the software knows where these things are. If you're going to do this in Photoshop or Affinity Photo or something like that, you have to go in and you have to say, okay, here are the teeth and here are the lips, and you make different selections. I mean, you could do a really good portrait edit in 5 minutes that would probably take 2 hours in another application, especially for somebody who, doesn't know how to do all of that, with the layers and everything.
This MacVoices is sponsored by Linode, your solution for when you need a virtual server in the cloud. Need a virtual cloud server like now? Linode has you covered. You can deploy a new server customized to your purpose with the features you want in seconds. Time is money, and if you have that immediate need, Linode is there. And even if you don't need your new server that quickly, Linode is there. And these aren't just any servers. These are SSD-based 40 gigabit network, high-performance processor-powered servers that are capable of web hosting, distributed applications, hosted servers, and more. Pick from a simple $5 per month Linode plan or ramp the whole way up to a high-powered dedicated CPU. When you need to upgrade as your requirements demand, that upgrade is a click away. To make some deployments even easier, there's a host of one-click installs available, from Minecraft to WordPress. Need to locate your server in a particular location for either performance or legal reasons? No problem. Linode has servers all over the world. Perhaps most important, though, is their pricing. No surprises, no hidden costs. You pay for what you need, and you pay for what you use on an hourly basis. No data transfer fees like some of the larger cloud services. It's your data. Why would you expect to pay to access it? With Linode, you don't. These are just a few of the features that Linode brings to the table. I want you to visit linode.com/MacVoices right now and see what all the fuss is about. Again, linode.com/MacVoices takes $20 off your first server package. You've been thinking about that virtual server of your own for a long time. Make it happen today with Linode. Thanks to Linode for their support of MacVoices. LinkedIn Jobs is supporting MacVoices. You know what makes your business go and grow? Good people. Good salespeople, good service people, good design people, good marketing people. Pick a function at your company, and it's the people behind it that make it great. And that's why LinkedIn Jobs is so important. LinkedIn Jobs not only helps you find the right people, but it helps you find them easily. That's important since you have one or two other things to do during the day. I'm on LinkedIn. You're on LinkedIn. Or you should be. If someone in business isn't on LinkedIn, I tend to ask why, and then I go to the next person who is. That's because I know that the candidates on LinkedIn are screened for hard and soft skills to make the hire not just fast, but right. There's a reason that LinkedIn Jobs is rated the #1 hiring platform for delivering quality hires. And that same reason is why someone is hired every 8 seconds with LinkedIn. Tap into that power as you make your next hire. Find the right person for your business today with LinkedIn Jobs. You can pay what you want and get the first $50 off. Just visit linkedin.com/MacVoices. Again, that's linkedin.com/MacVoices to get $50 off your first job post. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks to LinkedIn Jobs for their support of MacVoices. One of the features I wanted you to talk about, which you already did, was the sky. I mean, The sky feature is just like magic. It truly is. But your description of the application of AI is I think spot on. Because you hit it on the head. I go to other applications, and with all due respect to those other applications, they say, "Oh yeah, you can fix the eyes. You can make the lips fuller or the teeth whiter," and then okay, I'm on step 23, and I still don't have what I want. And that's where AI really does, if it's done right, and I feel like it is in Luminar, it really takes away some of those things that, as a human, I could do. But they're tedious, and if I don't have a steady hand, or I just don't want to take the time, this is not for me. And it takes me from Luminar takes me from step 1 to step 24. Now I'm ready to do step 25 without having to go through all that other hassle. And I really, really appreciate that about this program.
Exactly. And, another thing that I wanted to add about the portrait stuff is that, and this is sort of like more advanced. I feel like I'm skipping ahead, but you can set up these Luminar looks, which are basically, presets of, different sliders and controls. But because there's stuff that's AI based, you can do an edit on somebody's portrait, right? And then you can copy those edits to the other shots during that portrait session. So maybe you have somebody who you're shooting a family member or something, and they're standing in one way, and then a couple pictures down, maybe they've turned a little bit, or maybe they're like not in the same position in the frame because they're moving, you're talking, and all of that. Under normal circumstances, you would take those edits, you'd have to move your mask and change things around. With Luminar, you can paste those edits onto all of your shots, and it's going to do that processing because it it's going to use AI to identify the face in every one. So it's not like you're going to have, dark lips on one shot, and then the person turns, and then, those dark lips, like the darkness, like shows up in the middle of their cheek or something crazy like that. Luminar knows, okay, well, this is where the person is, and this is the amount of smoothing, and this is the darkness of the lips, and just applies that. So, if you're a portrait shooter, or maybe, like a wedding shooter, and you have a whole bunch of pictures that you want to have edited, like just that alone saves you, half an hour, almost literally hours, because the AI can recognize these things. So another really great feature, and I have to say, and I mentioned this in the book too, there are a few things about Luminar that when they came out with these features, I rolled my eyes, because I was like, oh, come on, really? And one of them was AI sky replacement. Because, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm this, photographic purist or whatever, but you go out to shoot a landscape, and like you're there to capture what you saw, and sometimes you get like the big dramatic clouds and the sunset and the like it looks amazing, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes sometimes you have a really nice evening that doesn't really result in great photos, but whatever. Or like all the clouds go away and your sky is blank, and you're like, okay, well, whatever. Well, this feature lets you put in a new sky. And, like my eye rolling self was like, well, no, like that's cheating, because it's not the sky that you had when you were there. And that's still true. But take a step back and you think, okay, well, you can be documentary and say, this was the sky that was there that day. And that's fine. It may not be great. And so maybe you don't do anything with that photo. Or maybe you were there on a different day, you had a better sky. And if, sort of taking that like next creative step, when you realize that, oh, like I'm not a documentary photographer. I'm not a news photographer. If I want to have a really nice sky and, whatever was happening in the foreground was something interesting, I can put those things together. Now, that sounds kind of highfalutin, like, ooh, now I'm an artist. Oh. But there are also times when, like that, you get skunked and you don't have a good sky. But maybe that's the only opportunity you had to go to that location. Or, maybe you're a real estate photographer. It doesn't really matter if the sky behind the house that you're shooting, was perfect on the day. And most real estate photographers, like they don't have the luxury of just waiting around and, waiting for the really great sunset. The idea is to get a shot that somebody's going to look at and say, wow, this house looks great. And so they do background replacements all the time, because you just want something that kind of makes the sky look better, or what's coming through the windows. So all this is leading up to say sky replacement is something that can be very difficult to do manually, because you almost never have just like a clear, unbroken sky. Like maybe if you're on a boat in the ocean and you have like that solid horizontal line of the horizon, maybe that. But quite often, there's trees and mountains and buildings and things like that stick up. To do this in a traditional way, again, you're making masks and you're blocking things off so that when you add the other sky background, it's not bleeding over onto the trees, what have you. So what AI sky replacement does is, like, it knows, okay, this looks like a sky. It looks like there's things sticking up in front of them. Those are probably trees. Those are probably buildings. That's a mountain. And it just plops the sky there and doesn't overwrite any of the foreground stuff. I mean, the AI is really good. There's a picture in the book that I used as an example. There's this bed and breakfast in Lopez Island, one of the San Juan Islands, just near here. And I took a picture. They have like a little pergola that sort of leads to a walkway and then to the house. So the picture was fine. The sky was fine. But I was like, okay, here's something that I'm sure Luminar is going to choke on. Let's just see what happens. Because I actually did a sky replacement once, and I had to, draw like with pens and mask everything out, and it was okay, but it took me 3 or 4 hours. So I'm like, okay, well, this is going to be impossible because the boards of the pergola are like coming down, like they're really in the foreground, they're interrupting the sky. And I tell you what, I put it in there and it was like 90% perfect. There were a couple of slats where the software wasn't really sure if that was the sky or not, and so it didn't bleed through. And in order to fix that, there are 3 or 4 controls that kind of let you determine, how aggressive should it be looking for these areas. And, basically, I want to say it took 15 minutes, 20 minutes of monkeying around just to find that balance so that it wasn't bleeding through some of the other areas. And it was done. It looks amazing. Now, if you knew the house, you know that the sun doesn't come up or set on that side, but that doesn't really matter, right?
It's a detail. Yeah, that doesn't
it's a detail, yeah. So, this is a very long way of basically saying like the AI stuff that they've done is really good. And for the features that use it, it can save you a whole lot of time, a whole lot of frustration, maybe let you do things that you didn't even intend or think about before. There's an AI augmented sky that just came out in the latest update where, you can add things to a sky because the software already knows where the sky is. So wouldn't your shot be more interesting if there was like a line of birds going across it? Like little things like that where you may know that, oh, there were no birds that flew by at that time, but it makes this picture more interesting. Of course, you can also go crazy and you can have the planet Saturn rising in the background. I mean, you can sort of do anything you want. And they're kind of pushing that as be creative, do sort of like wacky things. And that's not really my thing, but a lot of people, do like to do it, but it saves you a lot of time. It makes it really easy. And and then all of that, like those are the kind of standout, like this is how Luminar is different, but you also have a lot of the other advanced stuff like masks and layers and, blend modes, things that if you know what you're doing, and after you read my book, you will, then you can really manipulate photos in either subtle ways or more dramatic ways, or pull out detail that you didn't know was there, that kind of thing.
We'll have more with Jeff Carlson talking about Luminar 4, and we're going to dig a bit deeper into the interaction between Luminar 4 and RAW and what RAW is, and maybe even find out a couple apps that you should be shooting with on your iPhone to get better performance out of Luminar 4. So until the next time, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.